So in the past videos that I've made, as well as what many of you have seen on YouTube, everyone's talking about when Japan is going to open up, group package tours, what are the entry level numbers into Japan. But I recently was thinking of what is underneath all of these topics. And what I found is that there's a much more deeper rooted problem. And the problem is not just about Prime Minister Kishida and when he makes up his mind to open up Japan. It goes deeper than that. And some people have mentioned and talked about it, but not many have really looked at what is the reason that Japan is so wary or afraid to open up its borders to independent tourists and visitors. In today's video, I'm going to talk about what I think is the primary deep-rooted reason that is causing Japan to waver, and which is then triggering, group package tours, entry numbers, and everyone's focusing here. But I think we have to look down here at the root of the problem so we could better understand why Japan hasn't opened up and when it might open up. Hey everyone, this is Mike Matsuno. This is the Man in Japan channel. If this is your first time to the channel, you're interested in knowing what's going on in Japan, being updated, please hit that like button and subscribe. Japan has the most hospitals in the world per capita with 8,442 hospitals for its population of 127 million people. And so, for example, Japan has 13 beds per 1,000 people. The United States is at 2.9. So if Japan has more hospital beds per capita, and they have fewer infected people than any other country in the G7, why is there a shortage of beds? You would think that Japan, with that many beds and with that kind of hospital medical system, that they could take care of any kind of acute illness or disease, or even something like a pandemic. Japan has mainly two types of hospitals, public and private. The total number of all hospitals is 4,255. Out of that total, 80% or a little over 3,000 are private hospitals. Private hospitals tend to be smaller, from small to mid-size, and there are a few larger hospitals, and their bed number is about 19 up to 200. And the remaining 20% are usually government or public hospitals. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing. So out of those 3,000 private hospitals, only 30% agreed to accept COVID patients. Each of the hospitals, whether it's public or private, they can decide how many beds they want to open up to COVID patients. For private hospitals, the number is actually quite small. It's usually between 3 beds to 12 beds. And part of the problem is the Japanese government cannot force or compel these smaller hospitals to take in more patients because they're private and they're self-supporting, and so they don't have the backing of the government or taxpayer dollars. Of the 1,289 public government larger hospitals, 78% said that they would take in COVID patients. Again, the number though is decided by the hospital and it varies, and it's still very limited. I heard numbers between 20 and 40 beds. The larger public and government hospitals, they have the backing of the national and local governments. So if they have any money problem, taxpayer dollars can cover the difference. But there is also a reverse side of that. If you are a public or Japanese government hospital, you do have the backing of the taxpayers, but on the reverse end, if the Japanese government asks you to open up more beds, you are compelled to increase the number of beds you have for COVID patients. I think you can start to see the problem. Japan has a large number of available hospital beds for Japanese citizens. The problem is the beds that are designated for COVID patients are very few, and the government cannot force private hospitals to increase the number of COVID patients because they're private. The government does not have leverage. The government does have leverage with larger public hospitals, so they have been compelled to open up their beds. Another reason for the lack of sufficient number of beds is a huge medical shortage of medical personnel who can take care of COVID-19 patients. Take, for example, Germany. Germany has a population of 80 million people. They have 8,000 medically trained personnel for COVID-19. Japan has a population of 127 million people, but presently they only have 2,000 intensive care specialists for COVID-19. So this is another reason why Japan cannot increase its number of beds for COVID-19 patients. They don't have the medically trained staff to take care of these COVID patients. In my opinion, as I have said before, Japan is more of a reactive country, more than a proactive country. And the government takes a long time to get anything situated and done. Once they figure it out and they start moving forward, usually it's quite fast. And as I said before, many times Japan tends to trip over its own 2 feet. They undermine their own progress by internally within the system that caused Japan to go slow or to take a long time to get anything done or decided on or accomplished. We saw it with the extremely slow reaction to implement vaccinations. We saw it with the lack of enough PCR tests. In fact, right now, Japan is going through a shortage of antigen test kits. So I was just reading an article from NHK World. Mano Toshiki from Chuo University, he stated that the system itself is too widespread. There's too many hospitals, too small hospitals, and they needed to consolidate, and every level should have a function and be part of the entire system where it's working together toward a common goal. It is said that moderate COVID patients require 1.5 times more staffing. In the case of intensive care or very severe cases of COVID, it's 3 times the number. So for private hospitals, it's not a good financial decision because they don't have that many staff. And if they pull staff off of other areas to take care of COVID patients, then they cannot make a go at it, and they cannot keep their beds full because they have to take staff from different acute illnesses and use them on COVID patients. Let's take an example. For a patient who doesn't have COVID but has pneumonia, the government will pay 50,000 yen for that bed. For a COVID patient who has pneumonia, they will pay 70,000, so a difference of 20,000. The problem is the staffing requirements for someone with COVID is usually 1.5 to 3 times. So even with a 20,000 yen increase for a COVID patient, it cannot cover the staffing costs. And in the end, the smaller, mid-sized private hospitals end up losing money. So for them, it's not a good business decision to take in COVID patients. The staff of the private hospitals themselves, many of them have not been trained to take care of critically ill COVID patients. And to be profitable, private hospitals usually have to keep all of their beds full. If there's a cluster infection that breaks out within their hospital, that could basically eliminate all other possible patients. And moreover, in a smaller hospital in different neighborhoods, if they have an outbreak of a cluster COVID infection, it could affect their reputation. People will talk about them, and it could actually hurt them for the long run in the future, and people would stop using or going to their hospital. So a lot of doctors, including Dr. Mano Toshiki, had said that Japan needed to consolidate their hospitals, and they had to have maybe smaller hospitals take care of mild or maybe moderate COVID patients. And the more severe it got, they would use the Japanese public and government hospitals who have more staffing, more equipment. But Japan, the government, never did that. He had suggested that they should have done it after the 3rd wave. Right now, we have the 7th wave going on, and it's still the same as before. So in Europe and the United States, the systems are different. But let's say in Europe, there tends to be a much larger type of hospitals, and the government has a lot more say in getting hospitals to open up more beds for COVID patients. In the United States, the government also has a lot more leverage. A governor, like say in New York, can set a mandate for all hospitals to open up more beds for COVID patients. Whereas in Japan, all they can do is ask nicely to open up their hospitals to more COVID patients. So even if Japan has the largest number of hospitals per capita in the world, it's not about the beds available to the public. It's about the beds that are designated for COVID-19 patients. And that's what the Japanese government is dealing with. And because they never took action after the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th wave, now in the 7th wave, they're at the same place they were before. And that's why the constant repetition of the same news stories coming out. We have to be careful of COVID because the hospitals are getting full and there are not enough beds. There are not enough COVID patient beds. That's what the key point here is. And that's what's going on underneath the decision whether or not to open up Japan to independent tourists and visitors. Until they address this problem, it's going to be very difficult for them to open up because no matter what, let's be honest, even with the vaccinations, and Japan has a high vaccination rate, if people come in, let's say you let in 20,000 to 50,000 independent travelers and visitors, the COVID numbers are going to go up just naturally. It might not spike, but it's still going to go up. And when it goes up, it's going to put a lot of pressure onto the hospital system. And if the private hospitals are not offering a lot of COVID rooms, and the larger public hospitals only have so many beds that they can offer, then there won't be enough COVID beds. And then like the house of cards, the Japanese hospital and medical system starts to collapse. So that's what's going on under all of this. It's not about group package tours. It's not about how many people they can let in. It's really about the hospital structural system that they have in Japan, and private hospitals versus public hospitals, and who is willing to offer beds for COVID-19 patients. And if that number doesn't increase, then Japan will always be in the same spot they are at this moment, that constantly repeats and recycles itself again and again and again. And until the government addresses those core fundamental problems, all this stuff that we talk about on YouTube, it will be directly affected by this problem. So I don't see it getting any better until the government actually figures out how they're going to maximize their number of beds, because they have the beds. It's just that the beds are not for COVID-19 patients. And there's one other thing that my friend, the Japanese doctor here in Sapporo, he did mention about the medicine. So you may remember in one of my past videos, I did talk about there was a rumor that I had heard that the Japanese government may not open completely to independent tourists and visitors until they came up with a medicine or medication that works, that had been tested, and they could sell it and have it available throughout Japan. And then they may open up to independent tourists and visitors. Well, my friend, the Japanese doctor in Sapporo, he actually confirmed that. Said that that's what he thinks. So it's not really a rumor. It's, maybe it's not an exact fact, but people in the medical profession have been talking about that. And you may remember in another video I made about Shinogi Pharmaceutical. They were working on a new drug. I had a short news clip about Shinogi Pharmaceutical was applying for approval from the national government, that they had done initial taste tests on hamsters, the animal hamsters, and they were applying for approval with the national government to move forward. And I think the next test would be on human beings. So I asked my friend, the Japanese doctor, today about that, and he said that actually isn't going very well. Although they applied, that right now it's going back to almost reset and to try again. That has still months, maybe years to go. So I asked him, is it only Shinogi? And he said, no, there are other Japanese pharmaceuticals who are working on developing a COVID-19 medicine, but no one has been successful yet. You don't hear anything, which means that nothing has been successful as far as their development, their research, and their testing. So what does that mean? You may remember my prediction from the very start. Again, that's my own personal prediction, was maybe this year, November, December 2022, or more likely the beginning of 2023, in January, February, March. And for sure, I was pretty certain that by May next year, 2023, Japan would be open, because the G7 is coming to Japan, Hiroshima, Prime Minister Kishida's hometown, and he's the chairman, that he would want to have it all open or he'd be embarrassed. So I'm still betting that that's probably pretty certain. Now I'm a little bit more skeptical now after I talked to my Japanese friend, if they're going to wait for the pharmaceutical, the medication to be developed before they open Japan, then it probably wouldn't be May. But I'm guessing there's going to be some kind of compromise. So I still am betting that they will be open by May 2023. But how soon before that would be the question. So what we know now is this summer is out. And I had said that before. And with the skyrocketing numbers this week, where it's the highest in the world, it would be almost inconceivable that there be any change for August and September. And the peak of the seventh wave, some people had said August 6th, I think it's going to be more at the end of August. So that will further delay and push back everything, even if there was any intention of opening up sooner. So I think September, October is probably out. Again, that's my own personal guess. I'm not a doctor, but just what I have seen and what I have heard. And now, after I heard from my friend about the hospital situation, think about it. If you only have 20% of your hospitals that can open up their beds for COVID-19, and the variants as they evolve, BA2, BA4, BA5, BA6, BA7, it's going to be a constant thing that will not be addressed until they come up with some kind of medication to take care or to solve or to cure COVID-19. And that tells me that who knows when that will be. I think it's going to be a compromise. Well, they might increase the numbers of people entering Japan, and there'll be a certain number of tourists and travelers. However, I don't think they're going to go wide open and open it up like before COVID, where it was open up to so many countries to come in on a arrival visa. But again, it goes back to this whole hospital structure problem, that at this time has still not been resolved, and there is no medication in sight. So what is Japan going to do? I don't know. I think it's better that we understand what is going on underneath, because that helps us understand why Prime Minister Kishida and the government are so wary or worried or concerned about opening up the borders. Hey everyone, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video and haven't subscribed yet, please hit that like button and subscribe. Until next video, arigato.